The designer heels clicked against my barn floor like tiny hammers driving nails into my coffin. Karen Mitchell stood in the center of my century-old barn, her perfectly manicured finger pointing at the hand-hewn beams my grandfather had cut from trees that grew on this very land. "This will be perfect for our gala," she announced, her voice echoing off the walls that had sheltered 3 generations of my family's livestock. "You will clean it, provide electricity, and remove all these animals." I watched her dismiss my life's work with a wave of her hand, the same hand that had signed dozens of violation notices, filed false complaints, and turned my peaceful ranch into a war zone. The same hand that now claimed ownership of my property for her social event. Behind her, Thunder snorted from his stall, his massive head turning toward the woman who had no idea she was standing in the domain of a 3,000-pound Angus bull who did not take kindly to uninvited guests. That was the moment I realized Karen Mitchell had just made the biggest mistake of her life. The morning sun painted golden stripes across my barn floor as I carried the first bucket of feed to my cattle. Steam rose from the warm milk as I worked through the familiar rhythm of chores that had started my day for the past 15 years. This was my sanctuary, my 40 acres of peace carved out of what used to be endless farmland before the city decided to creep closer to my doorstep. I had bought this ranch with the insurance money from my wife's death, seeking solitude and honest work after years of suffocating in corporate cubicles. The barn was the heart of everything, a century-old structure built by hands that understood the permanence of stone and wood. Inside these walls, I raised cattle, stored hay, and found the kind of quiet that city folk never understand. The peace began to crack when the bulldozers arrived across the road. Maple Ridge Estates, they called it. 96 identical houses with perfect lawns and 3-car garages, each one costing more than most people made in 5 years. The developers had been polite enough during construction, even apologetic about the noise. But politeness died the day the first families moved in. Karen Mitchell arrived on a Tuesday morning in October, her silver BMW navigating my gravel driveway like it was diseased. She climbed out wearing a business suit that cost more than my monthly feed bill, her sharp heels immediately sinking into the soft earth near my fence line. "I am Karen Mitchell, president of the Maple Ridge Homeowners Association," she announced, not bothering with pleasantries. "We need to discuss your property." Her eyes swept across my barn, my pastures, my life, with the kind of disdain usually reserved for roadkill. She made it clear that my eyesore ranch was dragging down property values and that changes would be necessary for the good of the community. "Your fence is 2 feet too high according to county regulations," she stated, consulting a leather folder thick with documents. "Your barn needs to be painted an approved color, and the smell from your livestock is creating a nuisance for families with children." I explained patiently that my property predated their development by decades. My grandfather had built the fence in 1953, and it fell under grandfather clauses that protected existing structures. The barn had never been painted because the natural wood weathered better than any paint could. As for the smell, well, that was what farms smelled like. Karen's smile could have frozen antifreeze. "Mr. Johnson, you need to understand that we are trying to build a proper community here. Your cooperation would be appreciated." The first violation notice arrived 3 days later, printed on official letterhead and demanding I reduce my fence height within 30 days or face daily fines. It was followed by complaints about my rooster crowing too early, my barn being an unapproved color, and my livestock creating noise pollution during feeding time. Each letter felt like a paper cut, small but persistent, designed to bleed me slowly rather than kill me quickly. I tried reasoning with Karen, explaining that my property rights were legally protected and that we could surely find a way to coexist peacefully. She listened with the patience of a spider waiting for a fly to stop struggling. Meanwhile, Thunder watched everything from his pasture with the quiet intelligence that made him special among my herd. At 3,000 pounds of pure Angus muscle, he was gentle with me, but commanded absolute respect from every other animal on my ranch. He had been my companion through the darkest days after my wife's death, somehow understanding when I needed solitude and when I needed the comfort of his massive presence. Thunder did not like Karen Mitchell from the moment he first saw her. When she walked too close to his fence during one of her inspections, he would position himself between her and the rest of the herd, his dark eyes never leaving her face. Animals, I had learned, were better judges of character than most people. As autumn turned to winter, I realized Karen's campaign was just beginning. She was not interested in compromise or coexistence. She wanted me gone, and she would use every tool at her disposal to make that happen. The war for my ranch had officially begun. The harassment escalated like a slow-burning fire that spread through every aspect of my daily life. Karen's monthly violation notices arrived with the regularity of utility bills, each one more ridiculous than the last. My rooster crowed too early at 5:30 a.m., disturbing the residential tranquility of families who lived half a mile away. My barn's natural wood color was depressing property values throughout the subdivision. Even my century-old oak trees were apparently blocking sight lines and creating safety hazards for passing vehicles. I drove to Tom Bradley's law office on a cold February morning, carrying a shoebox full of violation notices and legal threats. Tom had been practicing law in our county for 30 years, and his weathered face told me he had seen this kind of harassment before. "The good news is they have no legal authority over your property," Tom explained, spreading the documents across his desk like evidence of a crime. "Your ranch predates their HOA by decades, and you never signed any covenant agreements. The bad news is that they know this, and they are going to make your life hell anyway." Tom's warning proved prophetic. Karen deployed her inspection team, like a military unit conducting surveillance operations. Every morning brought new visitors armed with cameras and clipboards, documenting imaginary violations and trespassing on my land, with the confidence of people who believed their authority extended everywhere their eyes could see. The inspectors were HOA residents who had volunteered for the role, treating it like a hobby or social club activity. They photographed my fence from every angle, measured distances between buildings, and recorded the exact times my animals made noise. When I asked them to leave my property, they claimed they were standing on public easements and surveying for community safety. My elderly neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, became collateral damage in Karen's war. She had lived next to my ranch for 20 years and actually enjoyed watching my cattle graze. But Karen's team intimidated her with official-sounding threats about harboring nuisance complaints and failing to report code violations. Soon, Mrs. Patterson stopped waving when I drove past, her curtains drawn tight against the possibility of being seen fraternizing with the enemy. The town hall meetings were exercises in public humiliation, disguised as civic engagement. Karen had organized a petition demanding the county rezone my agricultural land to residential, forcing me to defend my right to exist in front of hostile audiences who saw me as an obstacle to their property values. "This ranch is a relic of the past," Karen announced during one particularly brutal meeting, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. We cannot allow one selfish individual to hold back progress for an entire community. I stood alone at the podium, facing 60 pairs of eyes that had already decided I was guilty of the crime of existing in their perfect world. I explained property rights, grandfather clauses, and agricultural zoning, but legal facts were no match for mob mentality fueled by Karen's relentless propaganda. The breaking point came during cattle transport season. I had contracted with a local processor to move several head of cattle, a routine operation I had performed dozens of times over the years. The transport truck arrived at dawn, and we began loading animals with the quiet efficiency of people who had done this work their entire lives. Karen appeared with 3 HOA board members as the truck was backing up to my loading ramp. They positioned themselves directly in my driveway, claiming my commercial livestock operation was violating noise ordinances and demanding I cease operations immediately. "You do not have permits for commercial trucking," Karen shouted over the sound of the diesel engine. "This is a residential area, and we will not tolerate industrial activity." I tried explaining that agricultural operations were protected by state law, but Karen's team had already called the county sheriff, reporting an illegal commercial operation and dangerous trucking activity in a residential zone. The sheriff arrived to find Karen's group blocking my driveway while my cattle waited in the truck, growing more agitated by the minute. After an hour of heated discussion and several phone calls to county offices, the sheriff confirmed that my agricultural activities were completely legal and ordered Karen's group to move. But the damage was done. My cattle were stressed, my contract was delayed, and my reputation as a troublemaker was cemented in the minds of anyone who witnessed the confrontation. That night, I sat on my porch watching Thunder graze in the moonlight, his massive form moving with the calm confidence of an animal who knew exactly where he belonged. Thunder had been growing more protective lately, positioning himself closer to the house whenever strangers appeared, his dark eyes tracking every movement with the intensity of a guardian. I was documenting everything now, filling folders with photographs, recording conversations, and building the case Tom Bradley said I would eventually need. But evidence meant nothing if the system was rigged against you. Karen Mitchell was not just harassing me anymore. She was teaching me that justice was a luxury that belonged to whoever had the most lawyers and the least conscience. Karen arrived on a bright April morning with an entourage that looked like a government raid. 3 HOA board members flanked her as she marched up my driveway, followed by a sheriff's deputy who looked uncomfortable about whatever orders had brought him to my door. I watched from my kitchen window as they formed a semicircle near my front porch, Karen consulting her leather folder like a general reviewing battle plans. The knock came sharp and official, the kind of sound that announced serious business. I opened the door to find Karen wearing her most professional smile, the one that never reached her eyes and always preceded her worst demands. "Mr. Johnson, we are here on official HOA business," she announced, her voice carrying the authority of someone who believed her own propaganda. "We need to conduct a safety inspection of your barn structure." The deputy shifted his weight uncomfortably. "Ma'am, I am just here to keep the peace. This is a civil matter between you and the homeowner." Karen's smile never wavered. "Of course, Deputy Martinez. We just want to ensure there are no safety violations that could affect the surrounding community." I knew I had no legal obligation to allow them entry, but Tom Bradley had advised me to avoid any actions that could be twisted into obstruction or failure to cooperate with official inspections. I stepped aside and watched Karen lead her parade of authority through my front door and toward my barn. The barn inspection was a violation of everything sacred about my life. Karen walked through my workspace like a prospective buyer evaluating real estate, her heels clicking against the concrete floor as she examined the hand-hewn beams, the stone foundation, and the century-old craftsmanship that had outlasted 3 generations of weather and time. "This is actually quite remarkable," she murmured, running her fingers along a beam that my grandfather had shaped with hand tools. "The rustic aesthetic is very authentic, very charming." Her board members nodded like trained seals, taking photographs and making notes while I stood in my own barn feeling like a prisoner in my own home. Thunder watched from his stall, his massive head turned toward the intruders with the kind of focused attention that made experienced cattlemen nervous. Karen completed her circuit of the barn and turned to face me with the expression of someone about to deliver wonderful news. "Mr. Johnson, I have a proposition that could solve all our problems." She produced a contract from her leather folder, the pages thick with legal language and fine print. "The Maple Ridge HOA annual gala is scheduled for next month, but our original venue has had to cancel due to flooding. Your barn would be perfect for our event." I stared at the contract, trying to process the audacity of what she was suggesting. "You want to rent my barn for a party?" "Not rent," Karen corrected with her frozen smile. "This would be your community service obligation, a way to show that you are committed to being a good neighbor and supporting community events." The contract was a masterpiece of legal extortion disguised as a generous offer. I would be required to remove all livestock from the premises for 3 days. I would need to clean the barn to hotel standards, which meant power washing, disinfecting, and removing all traces of agricultural activity. I would provide electrical service, lighting, and access for catering companies. Most importantly, I would accept full liability for any accidents or damages that occurred during their event. Our original venue was charging us $8,000, Karen explained, her voice dripping with false generosity. "We are offering you the opportunity to contribute this service to your community at no charge." I looked around my barn, imagining strangers trampling through my life's work, demanding I erase every trace of honest labor so they could play dress-up in my sanctuary. The thought of moving Thunder and my other animals, of scrubbing away the authentic patina of decades of use, of watching Karen hold court in the space where I had found peace after my wife's death, made my stomach turn. "I appreciate the offer," I said carefully, "but this barn is a working agricultural facility. My livestock live here, my equipment is stored here, and I cannot simply relocate everything for a social event." Karen's smile disappeared like a mask falling away. "Mr. Johnson, I think you misunderstand the situation. This is not really a request. Your refusal to participate in community events would demonstrate a clear pattern of antisocial behavior that we would be forced to document in our ongoing complaints to county authorities." The board members nodded in unison, their faces reflecting Karen's shift from fake friendliness to open hostility. The deputy looked increasingly uncomfortable as the conversation moved from inspection to obvious coercion. "You have 48 hours to consider our generous offer," Karen continued, her voice now cold as winter steel. "I would hate to see your continued refusal to cooperate escalate into more serious legal complications." She turned and marched out of my barn, her entourage following like ducklings behind their mother. The deputy lingered for a moment, his expression apologetic. "Sir, I want you to know that I am just here to prevent any disturbances," he said quietly. "This is not a criminal matter, and you have every right to refuse their request." After they left, I stood alone in my barn with Thunder, who had been unusually agitated during the entire encounter. His dark eyes followed my movements as I walked to his stall, and I could feel the tension radiating from his massive frame. "They do not know what they are asking for, do they, boy?" I whispered, running my hand along his neck. Thunder snorted and turned his attention back toward the barn entrance, as if he could still sense the threat that had invaded our sanctuary. That night, I called Tom Bradley and described the encounter. His response was exactly what I expected and exactly what I feared. "They cannot legally force you to host their event," he said, "but they can make your life hell if you refuse. The question is, how much are you willing to sacrifice to maintain your principles?" I looked out my window at Thunder grazing in the moonlight, his massive form silhouetted against the stars. Some sacrifices were worth making. Some battles were worth fighting. Some bulls were worth unleashing. Karen's fury erupted like a volcano after my refusal, and the next week brought a campaign of harassment that made her previous efforts look like gentle suggestions. The first fake emergency call came at 5:30 a.m. on a Monday morning, claiming I was neglecting animals and operating an illegal breeding facility without proper permits. Animal Control arrived with their truck and clipboards, ready to document the horrific conditions they had been told to expect. Instead, they found healthy livestock, clean facilities, and all the proper documentation for my small cattle operation. The lead inspector, a weathered man named Robert who had been doing this job for 20 years, apologized for the disruption. "Someone called in claiming you had dozens of dead animals," he explained, looking around my pristine barn with obvious confusion. "They said you were running some kind of puppy mill or illegal breeding operation." The fire department came next, responding to reports of toxic smoke and dangerous chemical storage on my property. They found no smoke, no chemicals, and no violations of any fire codes. The health department followed, investigating claims of contaminated water supplies and disease outbreaks that existed only in Karen's imagination. Each false report required a full investigation. Each investigation brought official vehicles, uniformed personnel, and the kind of public spectacle that made neighbors whisper and point. Karen had weaponized the system itself, turning every emergency service into an instrument of harassment. The police visits were the worst. Karen had filed reports claiming I had threatened her safety and displayed aggressive behavior during our encounters. I found myself sitting in interrogation rooms, explaining my side of conversations that had been twisted into criminal threats by Karen's creative retelling. "Mr. Johnson, Mrs. Mitchell says you told her she would regret harassing you," Detective Williams read from his notes. "She feels threatened by your behavior and wants it on record." I tried explaining that I had never threatened anyone, that I had been consistently polite despite months of harassment. But Karen's reports painted a picture of an unstable man pushed to the edge by reasonable community expectations. The detective was professional but firm in his warning that any further incidents would result in more serious consequences. My livestock began showing the stress of constant disruption. Cattle are sensitive animals, and the parade of strangers, official vehicles, and raised voices had them on edge constantly. My milk production dropped as the cows became too agitated to cooperate during feeding time. My prize mare, a gentle quarter horse named Lady who had been with me for 8 years, began showing signs of severe anxiety. The miscarriage happened on a Thursday morning while the health department was conducting their second emergency inspection of the week. Lady had been due to foal in 2 months, and the stress of constant disturbance finally took its toll. I found her in the pasture, the life she had been carrying gone, her eyes reflecting a pain I understood too well. I knelt beside Lady in the grass, my hand on her neck, and felt something break inside my chest. This was not about property values or community standards anymore. This was about Karen's willingness to destroy innocent lives to satisfy her need for control. Mrs. Patterson's tears were the final straw. I found my elderly neighbor crying on her front porch after Karen's latest visit, her frail hands shaking as she tried to explain what had happened. She said I was harboring a nuisance neighbor, Mrs. Patterson whispered, her voice barely audible through her sobs. She said if I did not file a complaint against you, she would report me for violating community standards. She said they could force me to move. Mrs. Patterson had lived in her small house for 40 years, raised her children there, buried her husband from there. The thought of this gentle woman being terrorized because of her association with me made my blood boil with a rage I had not felt since my wife's death. Karen's final assault came in the form of a court injunction, claiming Thunder posed a clear and present danger to community safety. She had convinced a judge to hold an emergency hearing, presenting a case built on lies, doctored photographs, and false testimony from witnesses who claimed Thunder had attacked children and damaged property. I sat in that courtroom watching Karen perform for the judge like an actress auditioning for her life. She had photographs that made Thunder look threatening, witness statements claiming he had charged at children and destroyed property, and a compelling narrative about a dangerous animal being harbored by an unstable owner. Your Honor, this bull has been allowed to roam freely in a residential area, Karen testified, her voice trembling with manufactured fear. Children walk to school past this property every day, and we live in constant terror that someone will be seriously injured or killed. The photographs were clever manipulations of perspective and timing, making Thunder appear enormous and threatening as he stood near my fence line. The witness statements were carefully crafted lies that sounded believable to someone who had never seen Thunder's gentle nature. My lawyer tried to present evidence of Thunder's actual temperament, veterinary records showing his calm disposition, and testimony about his role as a working farm animal rather than a threat to public safety. But Karen had done her homework, and her presentation was polished, professional, and completely convincing to someone who knew nothing about cattle. The judge ordered a restraining order requiring me to keep Thunder confined to a secure enclosure pending a full hearing. He also ordered animal control to conduct weekly inspections to ensure compliance, adding another layer of official harassment to Karen's campaign. Walking out of that courtroom, I felt the weight of defeat crushing down on my shoulders. Karen had used the system to turn my gentlest animal into a legal weapon, my sanctuary into a prison, and my life into a public spectacle of humiliation. But she had made one crucial mistake. She had underestimated Thunder's intelligence and my understanding of his nature. She had also underestimated my willingness to give her exactly what she wanted, exactly when she least expected it. That night, I sat in my barn with Thunder in his new, secure enclosure, studying the building's century-old architecture with fresh eyes. The barn had been built in an era when function mattered more than form, when doors were made to accommodate large animals and heavy equipment. The old sliding door system between Thunder's stall and the main barn floor had been installed by my grandfather, designed to allow easy movement of livestock during bad weather. It was a simple mechanism, operated by a handle on the outside wall, easily opened by someone who knew exactly where to find it. I ran my hand along Thunder's massive neck and felt his calm strength beneath my palm. Karen, Mitchell wanted to use Thunder as evidence of my unfitness as a neighbor. Soon, she would discover that some evidence cuts both ways. The phone call to Karen required every ounce of acting ability I possessed. I sat at my kitchen table on a gray May morning, my hands trembling slightly as I dialed her number, preparing to deliver the performance of my lifetime. "Karen, this is John Johnson," I said when she answered, my voice carefully modulated to sound defeated and desperate. "I have been thinking about your offer to use my barn for the gala." The silence on the other end lasted long enough for me to imagine her calculating smile. "Oh, Mr. Johnson, I assumed you had made your position quite clear on that matter." "The legal costs are mounting," I continued, letting genuine exhaustion bleed into my voice. "My lawyer says the court cases could drag on for years, and I cannot afford to keep fighting. Maybe it would be better if I tried to be a good neighbor." Karen's suspicion was palpable through the phone line. She had tasted victory too many times to trust this sudden surrender. "I see. And what exactly are you proposing?" "I would like to accept your generous offer to host the HOA Gala in my barn," I said, the words tasting like poison in my mouth. "If the terms are still available, I think it would be a good way to show the community that I want to cooperate." The contract negotiations took 3 days of careful theater. Karen demanded complete livestock removal, professional cleaning, electrical upgrades, and liability coverage that would bankrupt me if anything went wrong. She also insisted on premium decorating access for an entire week before the event, turning my barn into her personal party planning headquarters. I agreed to everything with the reluctant acceptance of a man who had been beaten into submission. Tom Bradley played his role perfectly, advising me in Karen's presence that cooperation was my best strategy for avoiding further legal complications. "I think you are making the right choice, John," Tom said during one of our staged meetings in Karen's presence. "Sometimes discretion is the better part of valor." Privately, Tom was far more supportive of my actual plan. "You need to be very careful about how you handle this," he warned. "Make sure everything you do is technically legal and within the bounds of your property rights." I consulted my veterinarian, Dr. Sarah Chen, about Thunder's behavior patterns and stress responses. "He is actually quite predictable," she explained during what appeared to be a routine checkup. "Angus bulls are territorial but not randomly aggressive. They react to perceived threats to their space or herd, but they also respond to familiar environments and routine." The barn transformation was like watching strangers redecorate my childhood home. Karen arrived with a team of decorators who treated my workspace like a blank canvas for their artistic vision. They strung elegant lighting between the ancient beams, arranged tables and chairs where my hay bales usually sat, and created a full bar setup complete with crystal glasses and expensive liquor. "This rustic charm is exactly what our theme calls for," Karen gushed, as she directed the installation of a dance floor over my concrete work area. "Authentic rural elegance with all the amenities our guests expect." I moved my livestock to temporary pastures I had rented from a neighboring farmer, explaining to concerned neighbors that I was trying to be accommodating and hoping to improve relations with the community. Only Thunder remained on the property, relocated to the small holding pen that connected directly to the barn's main floor through the old sliding door system. The pen was technically separate from the barn itself, satisfying the legal requirement that livestock be removed from the event space. But it shared a wall with the main barn, and the connecting door was original equipment that predated any modern building codes or HOA regulations. Karen inspected the arrangements with the thoroughness of a general reviewing battle plans. "Where is the bull?" she asked, noticing Thunder's absence from his usual pasture. "He is in the holding pen," I explained, pointing to the small enclosure on the barn's north side, completely separate from the event space, just as the contract specifies. She walked over to examine Thunder's temporary quarters, her heels sinking into the soft earth as she approached the fence. Thunder stood at the far end of the pen, his massive head turned toward her with the same focused attention he had shown during every previous encounter. "He looks contained," she said, though something in her voice suggested she was not entirely satisfied with the arrangement. "The pen is secure and meets all the legal requirements," I assured her. "He will not interfere with your event in any way." The night before the gala, I walked through my transformed barn like a ghost visiting his former life. The elegant decorations could not hide the familiar smell of hay and leather, the marks on the walls where my equipment had hung, the smooth patches on the concrete where generations of cattle had worn the surface smooth. I checked the sliding door mechanism one final time, testing the handle that would open the barrier between Thunder's pen and the main barn floor. The system worked perfectly, as it had for 70 years, requiring only a firm pull to release the heavy wooden door that would roll smoothly along its metal track. Thunder watched me from his pen, his dark eyes reflecting the party lights that Karen had strung around the barn's perimeter. He seemed to understand that something significant was about to happen, his usual calm demeanor replaced by a heightened awareness that made him appear even larger and more imposing than usual. "Tomorrow night, boy," I whispered to him through the fence. "Tomorrow night, we give Mrs. Mitchell exactly what she has been asking for." Thunder snorted softly and turned his attention toward the barn, as if he could sense the anticipation building in the air like an approaching storm. Karen Mitchell had demanded access to my barn. She had threatened my animals, harassed my neighbors, and used the legal system to turn my sanctuary into her personal playground. Tomorrow night, she would discover that some playgrounds are more dangerous than others. The evening of the gala arrived with the kind of perfect spring weather that made Karen believe the universe was celebrating her victory. I watched from my kitchen window as luxury cars began arriving at 6 o'clock, their polished surfaces reflecting the elegant lighting that transformed my barn into Karen's fantasy venue. The guests emerged like creatures from another world, the women in designer dresses that cost more than most people's monthly rent, the men in expensive suits that had never been worn for actual work. They moved through my property with the casual entitlement of people who believed the entire world existed for their convenience. I recognized faces from the town hall meetings, the HOA board members who had voted to harass me, the neighbors who had signed petitions demanding my removal. They walked through my barnyard in their delicate shoes, laughing about the authentic rural experience, while carefully avoiding anything that might stain their perfect clothing. Karen held court at the barn's entrance like a queen greeting subjects at her palace. She wore a flowing black dress that probably cost more than my monthly feed bill, her hair styled in an elaborate arrangement that had taken hours to achieve. She accepted compliments on her vision and leadership with the gracious modesty of someone who believed her own propaganda. "Welcome to our authentic country gala," she announced as guests gathered around the bar setup. "Tonight, we celebrate the transformation of our community from backward farmland into the sophisticated neighborhood we all deserve." The laughter and applause that followed her words made my stomach turn. These people were celebrating the destruction of my way of life, toasting the victory of artificial sophistication over honest work, raising their glasses to the triumph of harassment over property rights. I waited until the party reached full swing before making my move. The alcohol was flowing freely, the music was loud enough to mask other sounds, and Karen was basking in the adoration of her followers who hung on every word of her speech about bringing culture to backward areas. At exactly 9 o'clock, I slipped out of my house and walked along the barn's north wall where Thunder waited in his holding pen. His massive form was silhouetted against the party lights, and I could see the tension in his posture as he listened to the strange sounds and unfamiliar voices coming from his territory. "Easy, boy," I whispered as I approached the sliding door mechanism. "Time to reclaim what belongs to you." Thunder's ears perked up at the sound of my voice, and he moved toward the wall that separated him from the barn's main floor. He knew this door, had passed through it hundreds of times during his years on my ranch. To him, it was not a barrier but a simple passage between two parts of his domain. I gripped the handle and pulled with steady pressure, feeling the ancient door begin to slide along its metal track. The mechanism moved smoothly and silently, just as it had been designed to do 7 decades earlier. Within seconds, the opening was wide enough for Thunder to pass through. Thunder did not hesitate. He stepped through the doorway like a king entering his throne room, his 3,000 pounds of muscle and bone moving with the quiet confidence of an animal who knew exactly where he belonged. The elegant decorations, the expensive furniture, the crystal glasses meant nothing to him. This was his barn, his territory, his domain. The first scream came from a woman near the bar who had turned to refill her wine glass and found herself face to face with the largest bull she had ever seen. Thunder was not acting aggressively, merely walking through his barn with the calm purpose of an animal inspecting his territory. But his sheer size and unexpected presence transformed the elegant gathering into instant chaos. Tables overturned as guests scrambled onto chairs and against walls, their designer clothes forgotten in the primal panic of civilized people confronting raw nature. Wine glasses shattered against the concrete floor, expensive appetizers scattered like confetti, and the carefully arranged decorations became obstacles in a desperate game of survival. "Oh my God, there is a bull in here!" someone screamed, as if the presence of livestock in a barn was some kind of natural disaster. Karen's voice rose above the chaos, her authority dissolving into hysterical commands. "Get it out! Get it out now! Someone call animal control!" But the cell phone dead zone that had always existed in my old barn was working perfectly. The thick stone walls and metal roof that had protected my equipment from storms for decades now protected Thunder from outside interference. There would be no rescue calls, no emergency cavalry, no escape from the consequences of their choices. Thunder moved through the decorations like a force of nature encountering artificial obstacles. He knocked over the bar setup with casual ease, sending expensive liquor cascading across the floor in aromatic waterfalls. The dance floor became a skating rink of spilled wine and champagne as guests slipped and stumbled in their desperate attempts to avoid the massive animal who had reclaimed his territory. "Make it stop!" Karen screamed from her perch on top of a catering table, her elegant dress torn and her carefully styled hair disheveled by panic. "Do something!" But there was nothing to do except watch Thunder explore his barn with the methodical thoroughness of an animal conducting a security inspection. He was not attacking anyone, not threatening anyone, simply walking through his space, and occasionally investigating the strange objects that had appeared in his absence. The destruction was comprehensive but entirely accidental. Thunder's massive frame was simply too large for the delicate decorations Karen had installed. Every step knocked over something expensive, Every turn of his head sent crystal glasses flying. Every movement created fresh chaos among the trapped guests who huddled on tables and chairs like refugees from a natural disaster. "This is your fault," Karen shrieked at me as I appeared in the doorway, though I made no move to enter the chaos. "You planned this. You did this on purpose." I stood in the entrance with my arms crossed, watching the scene unfold with the calm satisfaction of a man who had finally stopped fighting dirty opponents with clean tactics. "I did exactly what our contract specified," I replied. "I removed my livestock from the event space and provided you with full access to my barn." Thunder chose that moment to investigate the remains of the elaborate floral arrangements, his massive head disappearing into a display of roses and lilies that had cost more than most people's monthly salary. When he emerged, dragging ribbons and petals, he looked like a champion wearing the spoils of victory. The guests who were still mobile began a desperate exodus toward the barn's main entrance, abandoning their purses, their dignity, and their pretense of sophistication in favor of reaching.